everyone, and welcome to today's Senturus webinar on tips for installing Cognos Analytics 11.2.1. Thank you all for joining us. In terms of today's agenda, we'll do some quick introductions, a quick overview of Cognos 11.2, talk a little bit about the smarter installer that IBM has created for the latest version of Cognos. We'll go over the hardware requirements, how to preserve custom files, various strategies for upgrading and the pros and cons of each, a little bit on patching for Cognos 11, an overview of Senturus as a company and some additional resources that we have available to you, and we'll wrap up with some Q&A. Quick introductions. So the star of our show today will be Todd Schumann. Todd is our practice lead for Cognos installations, upgrades, and optimizations. Todd has over 20 years of experience across multiple industries. He regularly syncs up with the IBM product development team, so he's on the cutting edge of where things are going with Cognos. And he's been working with Cognos pretty much since the day Cognos debuted. Todd lives with his wife and his two daughters outside of Washington, D.C. in Virginia. As for me, I'm Steve Reed Pittman. I'm a director here at Senturus. For the purposes of today's webinar, I'm just here to do some introductions, kind of oversee things, but Todd, again, is really the star of our show. So with that, let's go ahead and move on. We're going to do a quick poll. Just want to get a sense of what version of Cognos you're on today. So I'm going to launch the poll here, and we'll have a little bit of time for everybody to jump in there and answer. So the question is, are you on a pre-Cognos 10 version? Probably not anybody on this call, or if you are, you're definitely ready for an upgrade. But also if you're on Cognos 10 or any of the current, or I should say prior releases of Cognos 11. It does say 11.2.0 there, really that's any 11.2x. So if you happen to be at the forefront and already running Cognos 11.2.1, you can enter your answer in that last one. And let's go ahead and close out the poll. I'll share those results with everybody. So again, a lot of Cognos 11.1 in there. Nobody using Cognos 8, that's good to hear. Still a few people on Cognos 10. So of course we'd love to help you get moved on to the latest and greatest. As probably everybody on this webinar knows, Cognos 10 has been out of support for some time with IBM. All right, so with that, I will close out the poll page. And at this point, I will turn it over to Todd and let him take the stage for the real meat of our presentation today.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, going to jump right into Cognos 11.2.1. Just kind of touch on an overview of the new version. If you haven't seen it or you're not aware, it is a major UI redesign. They've been kind of pushing this Carbon X theme that was somewhat available in the defaults of 11.1.7. If you're on that version, you may see some references to that. That is now sort of the consistent theme that they're pushing for Cognos Analytics, Planning Analytics, and some of the Watson products. They're trying to make them all look and feel the same. So outside of the dark sort of theme here, new welcome page, new tabs. Another major change is sort of the entire navigation panel that used to be on the left, where you had home, search, my content, team content, recents, things like that. That whole panel is now gone. In its place is what we're calling the hamburger menu. It's sort of a stack of a bun and some burgers. You click on that and it kind of gives you an expanded menu screen that's going to be context specific. So you'll have access to the new button, and you'll have reports, dashboards, explorations, things that you're set up with your license type will be set up and available to you. A little easier to kind of navigate. They've also sort of grouped them into some similar types of categories. So we've got data specific one, exploration specific groupings, presentations, dashboards, report stories, things like that. So a little cleaner than sort of just a random list of all the different studios like we had in Cognos 11.0 and 11.1, and even going back to Cognos 8 and 10, where you had the launch, the different studios. There was just sort of a list there. sort of a more grouping style approach here. We've also got, instead of the team content, my content, there's just a button called content, and that's going to kind of take us to the next screen, which I'm a big fan of. It's almost like we're going back in time to Cognos 8 and 10. We've got those sort of tabs across the top, like we used to have with my folders and public folders. We can customize them like we did with portal tabs. We can add additional buttons up there. Even better is now we can it's just easier to see the names of the reports. I didn't really love the Cognos 11.0 and 11.1 sliding panels. It was, it was always too narrow in my opinion. It was cutting off the lengths of long file names and long folder names. You had to kind of drag it over or hover over to kind of get a tooltip and see what the actual detailed name was. Now we have plenty of space, takes up the whole width. I can even change things, like I can make it more compact. I can make it, shorter style views. There's different ways to change that view and just kind of be able to interact with it better. Checkboxes are back. You could control click things in Cognos 11.0, 11.1, but I think it's just easier to checkbox. You don't actually slip your finger and have to restart over. You can just easily see what's been selected. So if you're moving or copying files in bulk, it's just a lot easier, a lot more simple. You can switch it between this detailed list view and tiles. So a lot of effort and thought's been kind of put into this. And just, I think it's a much easier, more user-friendly experience. I'm not going to get too much into the new features of Cognos 11.2. We do have some references on our website. I did do a blog post on 11.2.0 when it first came out, just kind of highlighting some of my favorite features, just sort of being a long-time Cognos user myself, about 20 years or so. Little things that, I like and don't like over the time, and things I wish I had, 10 years ago, just calling out some of my favorite features, and also things that I hope that they add either in this build or down the road. If you want to go even more in depth, Rachel Su from IBM, who's sort of the lead project, at least for reporting on the IBM side, had done a nice webinar for us that you can also view and download and watch that video if you really want to get a highlight of some of the stuff in real time. So definitely check out those resources if you're interested in some more of the front end, fancy stuff in Cognos. But we're going to actually jump into the back end stuff and look at some of the administration stuff on the backside and talk about what's changed there today. So we mentioned in the agenda, a smarter installer. What does that mean? If you haven't done an 11 install, especially the 11.1, they sort of changed the whole process of how that works. You used to download this massive, like a tar.gz file that you had to extract, and then you had to extract it again and grab the installer from there, and it was just really slow and kind of cumbersome. So they started introducing a separate standalone installer, and then you would grab either a client zip file that would contain the modeling tools like FM, Cube Designer, Query Analyzer, or you would grab a server zip that had all the files you need to install the BI server itself. And that hasn't changed for 11.2. The one thing that has gotten a little better, and I use the term smarter with quotes, is in the earlier version you had to browse to the file and say, run the installer, here's the file I want to install. It now, I believe, it just scans the directory. It can tell you if it found one of those zip files in the same directory as the installer, and it'll just present all the options. So in that bottom right screenshot, you could see, instead of having to pick, between the tools and the server and the zip files, it now just says, hey, I found all these different options that you could install. Pick the one you want. And for the sake of today, I'm going to be focusing on that last one, the IBM Cognos Analytics 11.2.1. Again, not a huge deal, but just a couple clicks. It makes it a little bit easier. Hopefully they continue to kind of try to make these things a little bit easier for you as you move through the newer version, new releases of 11.2 and hopefully even to 11.3 when that comes out. As far as the Cognos components, nothing new here. Maybe just some of the terminology and the naming conventions. What they call now are the three main components is the content tier in prior versions, and I usually just refer to this out of habit as the content manager, and this is sort of the brain of your Cognos environment. It's going to be responsible for connecting to the databases, writing and reading information about your Cognos. When you create a report, it's going to save that XML, the SQL that drives that. your security, your metadata, your models, all that stuff is sort of in its own Cognos content store database. And that content tier, content manager piece is what's going to kind of be in charge of communicating with that and relaying that information to users. That database is different than the databases that you're reporting off of. It's a common area of confusion when people say, you know, what databases do we have, that there's a separate Cognos content database. You're not typically reporting off of that. That's just sort of information strictly about Cognos. The application tier, I just out of habit again call this the dispatcher. Same thing. This is going to be sort of the workhorse. This is running your reports. If you're looking to, you know, have a multi-server environment, you're going to probably have at least 2 of these to kind of load balance. And you know, large organizations with hundreds or thousands of users, you'll see 4 to 8 of these, you know, sometimes in a large multi-server environment. And then finally, the gateway, aka the web server. This is somewhat optional in Cognos 11, which was not true in Cognos 10. But if you want things like single sign-on, you want to use SSL, have image browsing, some of the nicer web capabilities, you're going to need to set up a gateway and leverage something like IIS or Apache. So those are the 3 main components. Just to touch on one of them, you can see that unselected in that screenshot is something called Easy Install. They've kind of had this in prior versions as well. That is going to basically really quickly spin up a prototype, very lightweight instance of Cognos, where it's going to bypass the gateway. It's going to set up a small, I believe, Apache Derby LDAP for you, so you can kind of create some users. It's going to spin up very lightweight Informix database for your content store database, so you don't have to go through the extra steps of kind of configuring authentications and namespaces. You don't have to create connections to and databases to create that content store. It does it all for you, so you can just get it installed and start it up. You shouldn't have to really do too much other than that. But again, it is going to be very lightweight. I wouldn't, you know, obviously run that in a production environment. You know, if you want to kind of kick the tires on a sandbox and just see some of the new features and get it up and running quickly, it's a nice option though, and something that they didn't have, you know, way back in the olden days, and you had to deal with all the configuration challenges that are part of a standard install. Mentioned, you know, web servers, IIS, Apache. These have also gotten much easier. They you know, originally, especially in early days, 11.0, I think before version 5, I want to say somewhere around there, the configuration for IIS specifically was an absolute nightmare. It requires a bunch of application request routing and URL rewrite rules that, if you've ever looked at those codes, it's about 30 or 40 just random characters like /, question mark, tilde, slash, you know, and it's so easy to get those mixed up. And if you made one little mistake, your web browser would just completely, you know, fail, and you wouldn't be able to connect or browse or anything like that. So someone who should probably get an award or a Medal of Honor built this IIS batch file where you literally just plug in where did you install it, what's the name of your dispatcher, and a couple other things like, do you want single sign-on? And you just run that file and it creates all this virtual directories, all those rules. There's no chance of really messing it up. And that used to be something that you had to download from the IBM website. It is now just fully embedded in the installation directory. I put a little link there or a note as to where it is. It's in your install directories, depending on, you know, if you use the standard, it's usually, you know, program files, IBM Cognos Analytics, and then there's a CGI bin /templates/IIS folder. And in there, you'll see that CA_IIS_config.bat file. You just modify that with Notepad Plus, make those changes and run it, and you are up and running with IIS. So very simple, very nice, much appreciated. Same thing with Apache. I mean, Apache's always sort of been originally a Linux type thing with code base and scripts, but you can run it on Windows as well. They provide several different flavors for Apache 2.2, Apache 2.4, as well as IBM HTTP server. They've got SSO and non-SSO versions, load balance and unload balance versions. So all kinds of different, you know, flavors of Apache if that's what you're using. And again, it's very simple. You just kind of change a couple parameters that you need to and point it to where you installed it, and you can get a web server. So a lot of that pain and challenges that were, you know, around in the past of trying to set up that gateway are much easier now that they kind of provide these out of the box as part of the installation. So big fan of where that's headed. Going into some of the hardware software requirements, these usually do change, not so much on individual releases, but going from 11.0 to 11.1, I believe there was additional requirements on CPU and RAM, and that's still the case here. They're kind of continuing to bump up these requirements. So these are the minimum recommendations from IBM, minimum being, you really shouldn't run it with anything less than this. Unlike other tools, I know Tableau, for example, does have actual hard requirements. So if you tried to, I believe theirs is 2 CPUs. If you try to install it on a server with less than 2 CPUs, it actually will restrict you from installing it. I don't believe Cognos has any restrictions like that, but you're going to get poor performance, especially around memory. 10 gigs is going to be very small. I've seen people try to install Cognos 11.1 or even 11.2 on an 8 gigs of RAM, and just starting it up alone is going to consume all of that alone and won't even start. So 10 being very small, you're going to probably want to go higher than that. Same thing with disk space, 7 gigs minimum to install the software, and they say, you need at least 5 gigs of temp space. Not really recommended, but just to, a sandbox, a very small environment, you can get away with some of these specs. What we recommend is going to be a bit higher. Again, mileage may vary. Not all users and organizations are the same. If you have 5 users in your Cognos environment, that's going to be a much different set of specs than we would provide you if you have 1,000 plus users, around the globe hitting the server, 24 hours a day. But a good starting point, I would say, is 4 CPUs. I would go 32 gigs of RAM. Disk space is dirt cheap now. At least 20 gigs for the install, and I usually like to throw about 100 gigs of temp space. Those things can get chewed up quickly, especially with heavy usage, and it's always, a pain when you're running into Cognos issues and it's disk space, and then you're trying to add more and scramble to get it on there. If you can just get a new VM or get it taken care of before you install it, it's going to make it just a lot smoother and a lot more stable. Content store databases. Again, I mentioned this earlier with sort of talking about the Cognos manager, the content manager, or the content tier component. These are the databases that are strictly about Cognos. So this list here is not the full list of databases that Cognos can connect to. These are just the only 4 that Cognos allows you to host that content store database. So SQL Server 2012 to 2019 are the supported versions. 2018, I believe they ended support with that with 11.1, maybe even 11.0, I forget, but 2008, if you're still on it, you're going to have to get off of that. And even 2012, you're really on the old edge of technology. If you're going to be doing an upgrade, I try to get as many of these things upgraded as possible and try to get as far to that right as you can. So if you can get SQL 2019 or Oracle 1819, one of those later versions, it's just going to make your life easier. You're not going to have to, you're up to date on Cognos, but now your OS and your databases are expired and you have to upgrade them and go through a lot of the reconfiguration and all this work again. So planning your upgrades, try to get everything as far to the right and current as possible, and you'll be just a lot happier, in my opinion. Another nice thing about SQL Server is if anybody is using Azure for their cloud-based environments, you do have what's called an Azure SQL database, which is really easy. You can just click a couple buttons and spin up databases. You can put your content store right in there. They work great. We've got some sandboxes and some prototypes that we run at Senturus. We use Azure. We've got several of these databases running content stores for different environments, for audit databases, notification databases. So really nice that that's supported now. Oracle, obviously been around forever. It does support Oracle 11G R2, but again, that's super old. We're talking 10 plus years now, time to move on. 12, even that's somewhat old. I'd go 18 or 19 if you can. DB2, another IBM product version. So they're 10.5, 11.1, 11.5, and then Informix, not as commonly used, but if you do use that, that's supported. It also, I mentioned that sort of quick, easy install option. It's going to install a version of Informix similar to that. That's going to be sort of lightweight, and you'll be able to use that for that easy custom install. Put a little joke here that I always enjoy when people say they have an Excel database. That is not a database. Browsers, this is another big one. Chrome Edge, Chromium, Firefox, the ESR version, and Safari are the supported versions. IE has finally been put out to pasture. Should do a poll, will you miss it, yes or no? I'm going to guess most people are going to say no. My favorite joke about it is the only thing it was really good at was downloading other browsers. So see you later, Internet Explorer, not going to miss you. Good news is these new browsers all work great. I personally prefer Edge, but Chrome also works great. If you do need the old query analysis studio, access to those old legacy studios, you're going to probably have to stick with Firefox and that ESR version, which is a different version than the regular build. The Firefox will support Query Studio and Analysis Studio, but again, those products were, notified out, I want to say 2015 by IBM that, hey, we're going to be pulling the plug on this. This is, I think 10.2.1 was supposed to be the last version. They continued to add it in 10.2.2, but it's been a long time. It's time to move off those tools. You're going to be continually losing support over time. So always good to get onto the latest technologies. So goodbye, Internet Explorer. Stick to these browsers and you'll be good in 11.2.1. Preserving custom files. We'll talk about upgrade strategies and over the top what that means. But the other nice thing about the installation process is once you are on 11, even if it's 11.0, you're now able to install over the top, which means you grab the newest version. When it says where do you want to install it, you point it to where you currently have Cognos installed, and it's going to update everything. It's going to keep your configuration mostly intact. You may have new areas that you may have to complete if it's, you're going from a really old like 11.0 to 11.2. There's possibly additional fields you'll have to kind of fill in, but things like your gateway URI, your dispatcher URIs, your namespace, authentication and databases, all that stuff, that should all be preserved. So you don't have to really reconfigure too much. However, there are things that you may want to save. It's going to rewrite a lot of the code in that installation directory. So things like company images and logos, if you've got JavaScript files, if you've got any type of war plugin files that integrate with other products that you may have, those without specifying them are going to get overwritten and wiped out. So you can either kind of make sure you know where those files are and back them all out and put them in a separate directory and then move them back, or somewhere, I want to say in 11.1 they introduced this preservation of this preserve.txt file. It's in the installation directory under analytics configuration preserve, and it allows you to call out specific folders and images, and files, and say, hey, when you're upgrading, don't touch these files. I want you to keep them intact. So if you kind of set it up the first time and keep that file there, as you continue to upgrade in the future, you'll be able to make sure that when you do bring things up online, people aren't complaining, hey, all the images broke, or my JavaScript files aren't running because the files are gone, all that good stuff. And it does also preserve a couple other files out of the box. I put the link there. That's a hyperlink. That's exceptions. You can see exactly what is preserved and what isn't. So if you see in that list there something that is not being preserved and you need to make sure it is, make sure you update this file. And that way, when you do upgrade, you'll have everything you need going forward. Another thing is always back up. Even with the preservation file, I have had installs for whatever reason just go bad. For no reason I could ever figure out. It would just wipe a directory, like completely wipe out your Cognos installation directory. Things can go wrong very easily. So always back up your content store database before doing an upgrade. And if you've got VMs, do a VM snapshot, get a copy of that image before, just in case you need to roll back. It can be catastrophic. So I say most of the time it does work well, but Murphy's Law definitely in play here. You always want to make sure you have some backups. Upgrade strategies. So I kind of mentioned earlier over the top. We'll talk about that. Other options, doing a fresh install and migrating the content through a database backup, and then the other option being a fresh install, but we do the old export import of the content store through the Cognos deployment screens. So over the top, I'd say this is probably the most common type of upgrade that we do now, you have to be on Cognos 11 in order to do this. The old Cognos 10 world, they were always sort of, lift and shift type installs. So even if you were, you're on Cognos 10.2.1, 10.2.2 looks almost exactly the same, but for whatever reason, you had to install to a new directory or a new machine, completely reconfigure everything. It kind of was a pain and unnecessary, in my opinion. With 11, again, you just point into the installation directory that you've already got Cognos 11 running. It's going to look and see what version's there. It's going to also be able to determine the components, so it's not going to prompt you again if you want, a content manager and a gateway on one server and a dispatcher and a content manager on another server. It already is able to pick that up. It's going to update the components for you, keeps your config basically current. It's very fast. It's very simple, in my opinion. You don't even really have to do anything other than just keep clicking next and just point it to a directory and you're done. So I'd say that's definitely the easiest way to stay up to date if you like to be kind of on the cutting edge with Cognos. They do multiple releases a year. Each one usually contains new features and functionality. So if you like to be on that bleeding edge, you can definitely, this is the approach to go. There are several disadvantages to this. The biggest one being the lack of parallel testing. So since we're upgrading directly on an existing server, once we upgrade that server, we don't have a chance to kind of compare it against the old one. We also have to sort of implement a code freeze or some outages where developers are no longer able to do work because we're upgrading and testing. Other issues, we're doing it right on the top, so we're not taking the time to do any kind of review of audit history and see what's being used. We're kind of keeping all the old junk as is, which again makes it quick and easy. We just upgrade everything and don't care what's out there, but it can be helpful when doing upgrades to take an assessment and inventory of what you have and figure out, is it something that we want to keep, or can we actually archive this or delete it and kind of keep our environment clean and nice. Also with the over-the-top upgrades, that means that you're not getting a new server. You're going to continue to use the old hardware, which is fine. But over time, it can become an issue. So we've got some clients that are still running, Windows Server 2012. And now is a good time, instead of let's keep upgrading that same version over and over again, maybe we should actually look at the possibility of spinning up a new VM, getting on Windows Server 2019, and getting some new hardware, things like that. Other issues are the rollout, so because we are basically upgrading an existing environment, everyone is going to need to get back into it as soon as it's online. Whereas if we had two different servers and we kind of kept the old one and had a new one, we can kind of slowly add users in individually or in groups and have them kind of give some feedback, do some UAT testing. Whereas, over the top, it's just going to be, okay, upgraded, done, go get in there, everyone, and we'll let you know or let us know how things go. So that's over the top. Again, probably the most preferred method, but does have some downsides. The other method is what we call like a fresh install, which is going to give you brand new servers, new hardware, new OS. The OS is going to be completely clean. Lots of times these servers have been hanging around for 5 to 10 years. There's all kinds of extra junk, old versions of Cognos never got uninstalled, and other products that people were, on there, lots of junk. So we're getting a brand new, nice and clean operating system. We also have the ability to do that parallel testing I talked about. So Cognos, 11.1 is running on the old server. We've got 11.2 running on the new server. We can compare side by side. We can say, hey, did this report, how long does this report take on the old one to run? It's running, in 10 seconds now. It took 15 seconds before, so we're actually getting better performance. We can even use tools like Lifecycle Manager. There are third-party tools out there from Modio and BSP that let you, do some regression testing and things like that. Those tools are going to require, two different environments that kind of compare and contrast and benchmark. And again, you lose that with over the top. With this type of install and new servers, we actually get that ability to do that. And again, since we got a brand new server, we can do phased rollouts where we let in, groups of people one at a time or in chunks, and have them kind of test it out, load test it, run reports, see how things look. Some negatives to this approach are, we're talking about a complete reconfigure. You're starting from scratch with your Cognos configuration. I mean, you can export and bring things over, but you're going to have different server names. You're going to have just some things you're going to have to reconfigure. It's not as seamless as the over the top. Same thing with drivers, any supported software, you have to make sure you get all those installed and configured. And when we do the database migration, we're going to do it at the database level. So we're going to take a backup of the current content store, move that back up to either another database or keep it on the same database server and restore it as a new database on there, or a new schema in Oracle. And then we can have Cognos running off that. So each version can only have one active database being used. So we have basically a snapshot in time of the old Cognos content database. So it's going to give us a perfect clone of all the content and information. However, the longer you wait to upgrade and to move people into that new environment, you're going to have daily activities, whether it's new reports creation, modifications, run activities, saved outputs. Those things are going to be happening in the old environment that aren't being captured in the new environment. So you're going to have to need to either keep track of them and manually move them over, or you're going to have to eventually just drop that snapshot that you used for the new version and restore it again with the fresh version. So decisions you have to kind of make when you kind of go live, and how you want to kind of sync up that delta of, here's when we did the snapshot, here's where we are now, do we need to kind of capture that missing information? So challenges that don't exist with other options, but again, you have to kind of weigh the pros and cons and see what the best option for your upgrade approach is. And then finally, the last one is very similar to the previous. It's going to give us some of the same benefits. We have parallel testing, phased rollouts. Other benefits of the export import is we're going to have a little bit more control over the content. So we can either choose a full content store deployment, where we can just say, hey, bring over everything and import the whole thing at once, or we can say, let's do it in chunks. Let's bring over the HR reports. Let's bring over the accounts payable reports. You can use the deployment tool, the export import, and manually bring things over, in time, and have those users start testing it that way. So you have a lot more control over what content is getting moved. Another nice feature about this, and this is the only one that allows this, is if you are switching vendors. So if you're going from, let's say, SQL Server to Oracle or vice versa, there's no way to kind of get a database backup out of one tool and load it into another, as far as I know, or not easily. With that content store export, that file can then be just imported to the Cognos front end, and it will load into whatever that new target system database is, assuming it's blank. So we can take a old SQL content store, run it through the Cognos front end as an export, spin up a new version of Cognos 11, have it pointing to Oracle, import that zip file, and it'll write it and populate all the tables in Oracle. So nice feature there, especially if you're moving between DB vendors, and that's really the only option you're going to have if that's your challenge. Negatives to this approach, again, we're talking about reconfiguring all servers. We're doing a brand new fresh install. This method is extremely slow, especially large content store databases with thousands of reports. I've seen this, especially a full content store export, take over a day, sometimes a day and a half. It does require some babysitting. I've seen it, crap out after a long period of time, which is painful. You get to kind of restart the whole thing. So it is slow. I really don't use it as much as I used to back in the earlier days. Database backups are going to be much quicker. Again, you have to reinstall your drivers and software. You're going to have that delta again with code freeze. I mean, you can continue to run deployments, from old to new as often as you need, especially if you know the reports that are being changed, but you're not going to be in sync until you actually go live and sort of shut down the old version. And then finally, the last one is the My Folder content. You're only going to get that in a full content store export. So if that's something that's crucial, you need to make sure all that stuff comes over. You're going to want to use the full content store deployment, and not sort of the browsing option where you can kind of select individual folders and things like that. Talk about fixed packs and interim fixes, specifically Log4j. You may or may not have seen, there was all over the news, I believe, I want to say the end of December, early into January. It was basically affected millions of different servers and environments. Everyone basically is using this Log4j. Cognos was specifically affected by this. So they did have several patches out there called interim fixes that address this issue. So I put a little screenshot on here that shows the version and interim fix that you need to patch Log4j. So if you haven't done this, I would recommend doing it. It is a severe vulnerability. They have for 11.2 is interim fix 3. If you're on 11.1, there's interim fix 8, And if you're somewhere between 11.06 and 11.013 FP4, there's interim fix 5. Interim fixes, I usually don't recommend people apply unless you're instructed to do so by an IBM support ticket. These are usually to address specific one-off issues. Fix packs are not the same. Fix packs are usually much more recommended. I do recommend usually always staying on the latest fix pack. That's going to provide hundreds, if not thousands, of bug fixes to the version you're on. I know a lot of people based on the poll were on 11.1. I'm guessing they're probably on 11.17, that long-term support release. There are several fix packs for that, and they are definitely worth keeping up to date on. The interim fixes, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Don't usually apply interim fixes unless you are specifically suffering from one of the issues that you are told that it addresses. So other than this log4j issue, stick with the fix packs. Don't touch the IFs unless you are instructed to do so by IBM or someone who is well aware of the issue that it addresses. I did put on here just in case people were curious. I was curious myself. Cognos 10 is basically a dead product. They're not supporting it anymore, but I was curious if it was affected by log4j. And in fact, apparently it is not. It uses the V1 version of log4j, so you're actually lucking out if you're still on Cognos 10. You don't have to worry about patching it, but you also are completely unsupported, and that tool should be, or basically is phased out as far as IBM is concerned. So it might be a good time to upgrade to Cognos 11, and doing so, getting on one of these latest, versions that is no longer vulnerable to log4j. Speaking of versions, another question we often get is, how do I determine what version I'm on? They did make it a little better in Cognos 11. You can click on, I believe, like the question mark or the about button somewhere in the top right corner. There's a little link. It'll tell you the major and minor build you're on, which is usually like 11.1, and maybe even the release. But beyond that, especially with the fix packs, you have no idea what you're on from the front end. There's no way to tell, from an end user. So you have to go into the server, into your installation directory, and there's a file in the very root install directory called the cmplst.txt. If you've ever opened the ticket with IBM, they're probably the first thing they ask for is you to send them this file. This tells them everything about the version you're on. And in the top of this file, there's something called the manifest, and that will basically give you this kind of major build like you'll see 11.17 there. And then what's important is that -220 and all that nonsense there, that can be mapped to the link that's in this slide, as well as that table, which may be hard to read. But that'll tell you exactly what build you're on, if it's a fix pack, if it's an interim fix, what have you. So definitely something to keep a reference of. And if you need to know what version you're on, just kind of grab that file and sync it up with this link, and you'll be able to kind of keep track of what it is, because it's definitely not something that's user friendly. I don't know why they can't just put the words fix pack 4 or interim fix 3 in there. They have to use these cryptic codes, but I guess it's job security. And then last but not least, what's going on with new versions? 11.2 has been really slow in my opinion, especially compared to the other versions of Cognos 11. We got 13, I believe, releases on 11.0. We got about 7 in 11.1, and it's been over 6 months and we're still on 11.2.1. It's been extremely slow. I'm not sure if that's due to just they're trying to tighten things up, and some of the releases in other versions, offered more features, but they also introduced more bugs. So hopefully the new versions will be pretty, well tested and no issues. We are, according to my sources at IBM, getting a 11.2.2 release by the end of this month, end of Q1. They are trying to commit to. 11.2.3 should be coming out shortly after, sometime in Q2. I'm told that feature is going to have, this is sort of an admin backend type webinar. So for those of you who care, and if you're on the webinar, you probably do, it's going to be a major conversion of a lot of those features and admin features that are still in that Cognos 10 admin console. There's still a lot of things you have to do through the old one. They've been converting things like security and accounts and things like that over to the new sort of glass Cognos 11 UI, but there's still a ton of things like content administration and things like that that are still in the old admin console. They're going to be moving the majority, if not all, of that stuff finally into the managed panel. It should hopefully have some enhancements there as well. I'm also told they're going to finally fix the schedules, which in my opinion are almost completely useless if you've got more than 50, 100 schedules. The new activities pane is just completely slow and unuser friendly. So that's also supposed to get a redesign. I'm also hearing they may add some event studio stuff capabilities. All this complete speculation. You didn't hear it from me, but that is supposed to be a big one. It's 11.2.3 for administrators. And then finally, 11.2 will be going into long-term support. I'm not sure how many more releases we're going to get beyond the R3 version in Q2. Hopefully we get one or two more each quarter, but somewhere probably around 11.2, 4 or 5, maybe even 6 if we're lucky, will be sort of the end of the 11.2 lifecycle. That will go into that long-term support. And you'll have about 2 years of fixed packs, similar to what we're experiencing right now in 11.1.7. So that is the roadmap. I do, if you don't follow our website or follow me or Senturus on LinkedIn, definitely follow us. I do post blogs. As soon as I get the information, I'm usually able to get a couple of weeks out, just some high-level information and some screenshots on new versions, new features, things like that from some of the IBM management team. So I'll try to share those with you. So definitely follow us on LinkedIn and our website and keep up to date with those. And with that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Steve to wrap things up. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Todd. Just a few quick things here before we go into the Q&A session. First and foremost, getting help with your upgrade. Senturus is available. We provide a variety of services to help with upgrades. We can help you as much or as little as you need, and we can do that in a variety of ways. We offer mentoring if you want sort of hands-on guidance and essentially training for your team on how to do installations and upgrades. We can do side-by-side mentoring, providing our expert guidance and transferring that knowledge to your team. We also provide quick start upgrades where we basically help you get a development environment up and running, and we provide full documentation for your reference on that to help you with subsequent upgrades. And last but not least, and honestly the most common situation, is for us to provide a full implementation for upgrades. Since upgrades tend to be infrequent, there often isn't a lot of in-house knowledge for the activities that are involved there. So it's pretty common for us to come in and run the whole upgrade, working with your team as needed to keep everything moving forward. And beyond that, I just want to point you to some additional resources. So in addition to this webinar and many others, and Todd's blogs, which he's referred to a bit earlier in the session, we have a wide array of resources available to you at senturus.com/resources. So be sure to jump over there and check out all the free material. You'll also find info there about our upcoming events. A little bit of quick background on Senturus. We concentrate on BI modernizations and migrations across the entire BI stack. We provide a full spectrum of services, including training in Power BI, Tableau, and Cognos. So even though today's webinar is Cognos focused, we are not just Cognos folks. And we really do focus on helping with migrations. And we shine in hybrid BI environments. We do have many clients who today are using multiple BI platforms, so that's becoming a pretty common situation. We have a long, strong history of success. We've hit our 21st birthday, over 1,300 clients, over 3,000 projects. So a lot of work under our belts, and we're happy to help you out in whatever ways needed. Lastly, if you're looking for work, we are looking for a few very specific roles, and we're always interested in talking to talented and experienced professionals. So if you happen to be a Java developer, senior Azure architect, or a Cognos BI architect and project manager, we'd love to speak with you. We're always looking to have good, solid people join our team. So you can click through the links here in the presentation to get more info on that. And with that, let's move into the Q&A. We've got a lot of questions in the questions panel. popular webinar here today. First and foremost, there were a number of questions about the long-term support release, and I jumped the gun and I said we didn't have info. I should have let the expert answer that question. It turns out, as Todd shared in one of these recent slides, and Jerry Grogan pointed out in the question panel, Cognos 11.2 will go into long-term support in December of 2022. But today, Cognos 11.1.7 is still the current LTS version. And so Todd, I'm just going to kind of go through kind of the overview. I'm going to just kind of grab summary information and just throw some questions at you if that works for you.
I can see them too. I can
okay.
tackle.
Well, do you want to just run through them then? Does that work?
Okay, yeah, that's easy.
Okay.
So I see a question here about Transformer, and that is still supported. It is its own standalone product. It really hasn't changed at all. I think they occasionally just change the splash screen to say, 11.0, 11.1. That product and even Framework Manager haven't changed at all. Although FM is included in the client tools, you have to get a separate download for Transformer. So still supported, hasn't really changed. It's just not part of the installations, especially the screenshots that I captured today, which are just the server and the client. It's not included in that client zip file, unfortunately. So if you have access to Passport Advantage, and you can just kind of just grab that installer from there, and it should be very similar to what you've had in the past. Let's see, what else do we have here? Someone asking about the long-term support for 11.2.1, and if we recommend going to 11.2 or waiting for a long-term support. It's dependent on your risk level. Obviously, the long-term support versions are the least risk. The version's been out for at least a year, if not longer, and they've kind of figured out a lot of the major bugs by then. If you're can't really afford to have any downtime and you don't have the bandwidth to deal with occasional troubleshooting, then you may want to hold off for long-term support. If there's new features and functionality that you really need, then it may be worth offsetting that risk a little bit to get some of those new features and functionality. So again, it depends on a case-by-case basis, I would say, but from what I've seen, 11.2.1 has been pretty stable and works pretty well. The biggest challenge, I would say, if you've been heavily using extensions and themes and customizing the look and feel of your Cognos 11.0 or 11.1 environment, you're definitely going to want to set up a sandbox before you upgrade, because there are just major UI changes. You're going to want to kind of test those out. So that would be the biggest challenge. A lot of the underlying reporting and the engines and stuff behind the scenes hasn't changed that much, but the front end UI has definitely changed significantly. And it's also in, I believe, the blog and in Rachel's presentation. But if you're a big dashboard user, another big feature I didn't touch on is they really enhanced the initial load up time of those dashboards. I think they did a side-by-side comparison of 11.1. Loading the same dashboard would take 15, 20 seconds for that thing and all the widgets to come through. In 11.2, they managed to really increase the performance of that. I think it loads up in just like 1 or 2 seconds. So if you're big on dashboards, a lot of users are using dashboards in Cognos, then you may want to definitely check out 11.2. It's going to give you some serious performance improvements there. Let's see, what else do we have? Questions about Event Studio. And that is a legacy studio. It's really buried in the product right now. I am told that they are working on getting a more integrated Cognos 11 look and feel for that tool. It's still very heavily used, and I think they're aware that people really love that tool. But that said, it's still not an official announcement. They haven't officially listed anything, so I'd say use it sparingly. I mean, continue to use it, but I wouldn't invest in creating a bunch more events at this point until they confirm that. Sometimes they'll say things and they'll completely reverse course. So same thing with the other legacy studios. You should not be creating any new Query Studio, Analysis Studio reports, things like Workspace, all that stuff. Those are all pretty much deprecated products, even though Event Studio is not deprecated, I don't believe. There hasn't been a lot of support for it in the new version, so use it with caution. Let's see. Question moving from Cognos 10 to 11 in JavaScript. That is going to be it was probably going to break. there is something in Cognos 11. I touched on this, back in the early days of Cognos 11.0. That migration is some of the biggest issues, and JavaScript was one of the top issues. So it used a different type of JavaScript in Cognos 10. You had to use those HTML objects, and you cut and paste a bunch of JavaScript code into that. When you move to Cognos 11, they wanted to make it as clean as possible. So there's something that the reports feature in Cognos 11 called interactive mode, and that allows you to click on the data in your Cognos viewer and do things like sorting and filtering. You can, I think if you have a crosstab, you can swap rows and columns, you can create custom calculations. It makes it very interactive. It's a much nicer user experience. However, it will invalidate any JavaScript you have. So, for example, one thing that in Cognos 10 that I was asked to do a lot was to build, some sorting into the column headers in the old Cognos 10 viewer, and you had to use JavaScript to do that. You embed JavaScript code around the headers and a bunch of ugly stuff that you just kind of copied and pasted. If that's what you were using it for, then I would say it's going to be even better in Cognos 11 because that stuff's built in automatically, and you don't need the JavaScript anymore. If it was something more involved in that, specifically like prompt validations or things that Cognos doesn't do today, then it's going to be a judgment call. And you can disable that interactive viewer that will allow your JavaScript mostly to run. But if you turn that interactive viewer on, then it's going to basically strip out all of that existing JavaScript at runtime. So you have to kind of have a discussion and see what exactly you're doing with your JavaScript, but it should be able to run it as long as you're willing to run your reports in a non-interactive mode. But again, if you have more questions about that, definitely reach out offline. We can have a talk about that.
Hey Todd, there was a question about the interim fixes and whether they are like full patch. Are they just patches, or are they like a full, I don't know the right word.
They're full builds. Yeah, so you don't need to have, like in the old Cognos 10 days, you would have to get the GA release of that version, and then you would go and get the fix packs or hot fixes, and you'd install them on top of the directory to patch it. Everything now with the fix packs and the interim fixes is just a full build that you have to get installed, a separate installer and the server zip file, just like you do for regular install. And they're 4 to 5 gigs for the server, I believe. So it's a full install. You don't have to have anything previously installed to get the patched interim fix version. That's a little confusing there how they kind of call it patching, even though it's the full build. You're basically wiping out and installing over the top. Question about Lifecycle Manager. I don't believe it's being deprecated. They don't really push it as much as they were, a couple years ago, but it is still part of one of the products that they offer. I usually preface it by saying, you kind of get what you pay for, and it's free. It can be useful in small amounts of testing, but you couldn't, hand off 100 or 1,000 reports and say, go compare these, with the old version and new version and spit out the results at the end of the day. It's going to choke. It needs some hand holding. It doesn't deal with complex prompt pages very well. If you're looking to do automated testing, you're probably going to be better served going, with a third-party vendor that does focus specifically on that type of testing. It's just not really up to the task, but it can be helpful. And if you're looking at small chunks and you have time to kind of work through it a bit. Let's see. Someone asked about the log4j. So the base 11.2.1 that you get, I believe, from Passport Advantage is not patched. You have to go to Fix Central and get the IF3 in order to get that log4j patch. I didn't mention this. I think I forgot to speak to it, but those IF fixes are sort of just software version fixes from IBM. If you don't want to do that, there is sort of a manual process where you can get a new log4j file that doesn't have the vulnerability. You can place that into your installation directory. There's steps out there. I'll put it in the question log that we'll post on the website after the webinar today, but it has the option to manually replace the files yourself. You're gonna have to edit some of the config files. It's a bit cryptic, go into some of the source files and repoint things to use the new log4j files that are going to replace the old ones. So it's a little bit more manual work, but it can be done. The biggest issue with that, it's happened to other people I know, is if you forget to, if you forget you did it and you try to upgrade to a new version, it's going to, that file is actually, that you modify, it's automatically in one of the preserved file locations. It doesn't get updated, and it's going to remove the log4j file, but you're still going to have references to it in that source file. So it's going to give you a very cryptic, hard to debug error when you try to start up a new version of Cognos. So make sure you make a note if you do that approach, because you're going to have to come back and tweak it later. If you can run the IFs and patch it that way, you don't have to kind of deal with that in the future. So just something that can get lost in the weeds with an upgrade that you don't touch for 6 months, and you come back and you're going to be ripping your hair out trying to figure out why. It's because you modified a source file 6 months ago that you forgot about. Let's see, we've got a bunch of questions. Someone asked me.
Todd, there's a question here about content store export imports and whether report specs are automatically upgraded. Oh, sorry, actually, I'm confusing two questions here. When you do an over-the-top upgrade to 11.2, are the report specs in the content store automatically upgraded, or is that a separate maintenance task? I think it's separate, but
so it's going to automatically upgrade the content store database. There, depending on what version you're going from, like they introduced like explorations and new objects, from version to version. Depending on how far of a jump you make, you may or may not get changes to your content store, but there are significant schema updates between versions. So if you were to upgrade from 11.0 to 11.1, that database could no longer be connected to from the old version that's been upgraded. So there's an upgrade that happens to the actual database schema and the tables itself, which is different than the report spec upgrades. And not all versions, the reports change, but some versions they do. And I usually just run it anyway after an upgrade. Within the content administration tab in the old admin console, there's an option or a content management activity or a task you can kick off called report upgrade. And you can feed it, individual folders at a time, or you can give it the whole content store or the whole team content folder, and it'll go and upgrade the specs if there are upgrades to be made, and it kind of spit out at the end, upgraded 125 reports, 4 needed an upgrade, 0 didn't, 1 error, things like that. So report specs will need to be upgraded, which is different than the actual database itself, which will be upgraded to a new schema. For typically each version is going to have its own schema. I think I have seen a couple of versions that didn't necessarily change the database, but that's why I say always back up that content store, because if you do upgrade it and then you forget and you have to roll back to an earlier version, that content store is not going to be recoverable. It's already been upgraded.
Thanks, Todd. So we're coming up on the top of the hour, everyone. So I think we should wrap up here. If we didn't get to your question in real time here today, do check our website for the questions log. We'll get that updated with answers to other questions. Or if you have a broader question that doesn't fit well into a single sentence, please reach out to us. You can contact us at info@senturus.com, and we'll be happy to set up a free consultation to discuss your needs. And with that, thank you everyone for attending today. We do appreciate you taking the time to come and sit with us today. If you need any more info, or if you're looking for help with an upgrade, you can reach us at info@senturus.com. Or if you like making phone calls, you can reach us at 888-601-6010. We're always happy to talk about anything and everything Cognos and beyond. So if you happen to be using other platforms, we're happy to help you with your hybrid environments as well. So with that, thank you, Todd, for all of your wisdom today. And thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.